Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, my investigations took me to Virginia in late December 1861 and early January 1862. Stonewall Jackson, pictured here, is at the heart of the story. So the story goes, Jackson was sent to the valley, the Shenandoah Valley, by Joseph E. Johnston, who was his commander at the time, with instructions to start keeping order in the valley. The federal army was starting to make incursions into the area. And that was not a good thing for the Confederates. And so, typical Jackson, he responded by getting up an expedition with the intention of driving the Federals out of the valley, or at least pushing them back a little bit. But this expedition is little known, at least to me. It's the Romney Expedition, because Romney, the town of Romney, which is now in West Virginia, is at the center of this expedition. And it ends successfully because the Federals there eventually withdraw, although the overall campaign is considered basically sort of inconclusive. What caught my attention when I began to think about this little expedition, this little remembered expedition, was that it occurred just a few months before the Shenandoah Valley expedition, Jackson's brilliant campaign that any military historian will admit goes down in history as one of the greatest. Well, in one of those big what ifs, there's kind of a chance that it might not have happened, because not long after the end of the Romney campaign, Jackson offered his resignation after a breach of military protocol. So I'm going to read you this passage because the best explanation that I found for it is given by Joseph E. Johnston, Joe Johnston, Stonewall Jackson's commander. In his book written long after the war, called A Narrative of Military Operations, directed during the late war between the states, Johnston details what happened. And I want to read it to you now. But before I do it, there's a couple of names that I want you to be familiar with. In addition to Johnston and to Jackson, there's William Loring, an officer, a general from North Carolina who had suffered a wound during the Mexican War that cost him one of his arms after it was amputated. Loring had the ability to butt heads with his superior officers, and he was technically reporting to Jackson. The other person is Secretary of War Judah P. Benjamin, who makes a little bit of an error that messes things up a little bit. So without further ado, here's the passage from Johnston's book. Quote, in the beginning of the year, it's 1862, General Jackson moved from Winchester with 4 brigades of infantry and a regiment of cavalry to drive the Federal troops, then in the northern part of his district, across the Potomac. Their number being inconsiderable, he succeeded in 10 days without serious fighting. His men suffered very much, however, from cold and hard marches. This is Johnston's description of the Romney Expedition. Afterwards, in the distribution of the troops of the district agreed upon by General Jackson and myself, General Loring, that's William Loring, General Loring's 3 brigades were stationed near Romney, General Meem's brigade of militia at Martinsburg, General Carson's at Bath, and the militia regiments of Colonel Monroe, McDonald, Harness, and Johnson occupied Moorfield and different points on a curved line, thence in advance of Romney to Bath. A week or two after these dispositions were completed, General Jackson received the following order from Mr. Benjamin, then acting Secretary of War. Benjamin said, our news indicates that a movement is being made to cut off General Loring's command at Romney. Order him back to Winchester immediately. End quote. After I had received from General Jackson information of this singular interference, it seemed to occur to Mr. Benjamin that his order should have been sent directly to me, for a copy came to my office then. So here's the breach. Benjamin sends an order directly to Jackson instead of going through Johnston, who would have and should have relayed the order to Jackson, if, of course, he deemed it correct in consultation with Benjamin. Now, Jackson, who's a stickler, he did not like this at all. This was pure interference, as Johnston called it in his narrative. So let me pick up with the narrative from Johnston. Here he goes. Quote, General Jackson thought himself so much wronged officially by this procedure of the acting Secretary of War that immediately after obeying the order, he sent me a letter addressing to that officer for transmission to him, asking to be relieved of his command, either by restoration to his professorship in the Virginia Military Institute or by the acceptance of the resignation of his commission in the Confederate Army. I retained the letter and wrote him this remonstrance. My dear General, I have just read, with profound regret, your letter to the Secretary of War asking to be relieved from your present command, either by an order to the Virginia Military Institute or the acceptance of your resignation. Johnston continues. Let me beg you to reconsider this matter. Under ordinary circumstances, a due sense of one's own dignity, as well as care for professional character and official rights, would demand such a course as yours. But the character of this war, the great energy exhibited by the government of the United States, the danger in which our very existence as an independent people lies, require sacrifices from all of us who have been educated as soldiers. Of course, he's talking about West Pointers and career officers. Johnston continues, I receive my information of the order of which you have such cause to complain from your letter. Is not that as great an official wrong to me as the order itself to you? Let us dispassionately reason with the government on the subject of command, and if we fail to influence its practice, then ask to be relieved from positions, the authority of which is exercised by the War Department, while the responsibilities are left to us. He's got one more note. Quote, I have taken the liberty to detain your letter to make this appeal to your patriotism, not merely from warm feelings of personal regard, but from official opinion, which makes me regard you as necessary to the service of the country in your present position. So there you have Johnston's recollection of the exchange of messages and the official communications between the Secretary of War to Jackson and then Johnston and Jackson. And as you can see, Johnston is basically trying to persuade Jackson to hold off a second. Let's not get hasty. Let's not turn in your resignation. Let's you and I work together and we'll talk to Secretary of War Benjamin and get this straightened out. Now, behind the scenes, and Johnston doesn't mention this, Loring had complained to Benjamin. This is Loring who's butting heads with his superiors. He complained to Benjamin about being left in Romney and not getting enough activity. And basically, he was bristling under Jackson's command. So it all ends happily for the Confederate Army because Jackson, of course, is not allowed to leave. Loring is removed and shipped off elsewhere, and the war in Virginia continues. It is fun to think about sort of a what if here, that had it gone another way, had Johnston not supported Jackson, had Johnston not tried to stop Jackson at all, had Benjamin interfered more and accepted the resignation of Jackson, there might have been no brilliant Shenandoah campaign in 1862. Chancellorsville might have gone differently, and Jackson might have still died at Chancellorsville, or he might have survived Chancellorsville and gone on to fight in Gettysburg and elsewhere. So there you have it. A note from a little known episode, Expedition of the War, the Romney Expedition, and Stonewall Jackson's decision to resign. Take care. We'll see you on the next episode.